There's something your man has never told you, not because he doesn't trust you, not because he doesn't love you, and not because it's something dark or frightening. He hasn't told you because the moment he imagined saying it out loud, something stopped him cold. A quiet, invisible wall built from years of conditioning, judgment, and the fear of being seen as too much or not enough at the same time. Most women assume that if their partner wanted something different in the bedroom, he'd just say so. After all, men are supposed to be straightforward about what they want, right? That's the story we've all been told. But here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. The men who seem the most confident, the most in control, the most put together, those are often the men carrying the heaviest silence about their deepest desires. This video is a safe space. It's not about judgment and it's not about pressure. It's about understanding. Because when you truly understand what he's holding back and why he's holding it back, everything changes. The conversations get easier, the connection gets deeper, the intimacy becomes something neither of you has ever quite experienced before. What you're about to discover isn't extreme, it isn't shocking for the sake of shock value. These are quiet, surprisingly common desires that millions of men carry around every single day without ever saying a word. And today you're finally going to understand them. Here's what most people get wrong about desire. They think it's purely physical. They think his hidden wants are just about sensation, just about novelty, just about something he saw somewhere and got stuck on. But the truth is far more interesting than that and far more meaningful. Every one of the desires we're going to explore today has an emotional root. They're connected to how safe he feels with you, how seen he feels by you, and how deeply he believes you truly want him. When those desires stay hidden, there's a quiet distance that grows between two people, not a dramatic distance, not the kind that causes fights or tears, but a subtle gap where real intimacy could have lived. Understanding what he secretly craves isn't about becoming someone you're not. It's about gaining insight that gives you power, the power to choose, to explore, and to lead the two of you into a level of closeness that most couples never find. This isn't just about making him happy, it's about building something between you that feels genuinely alive, genuinely honest, and genuinely yours. That's what's actually at stake here. So here's what we're covering. We're going to walk through 5 specific desires, 5 kinks, if you want to call them that research, psychology, and real conversations with real men reveal are incredibly common, yet almost never spoken aloud. These aren't extreme fantasies from the darker corners of the internet. These are desires rooted in emotional needs, the need to feel wanted, the need to feel safe, the need to be seen without armor. Each one connects back to trust, vulnerability, and the kind of closeness that transforms a relationship from something comfortable into something genuinely extraordinary. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just what he wants, but why he wants it. And that understanding is going to feel like a key turning in a lock you didn't even know existed. Let's go deeper. To understand why he's not telling you, you have to understand what men are taught explicitly and implicitly from the time they're boys. The message is consistent and relentless. Be strong, be certain, don't need too much, don't want anything that makes you seem weak or strange. Masculinity, as most men absorb it, is about being the one who has answers, not the one who has questions. It's about knowing what to do, not asking for what you need. When it comes to sexuality, this conditioning becomes a trap because desire is inherently vulnerable. Wanting something means you might not get it. Revealing a fantasy means risking rejection, not just the sexual kind, but the deeply personal kind. The look on someone's face that says, "That's weird," or "I didn't know you were like that," can feel devastating to a man who has spent his entire life carefully managing how he's perceived. There's also the fear of making you uncomfortable. Most men in loving relationships care enormously about how their partners feel. If he suspects that sharing a desire might embarrass you, confuse you, or make you feel like you're not enough, he'll bury it. He'll tell himself it doesn't matter. He'll convince himself the relationship is fine just as it is, and on the surface maybe it is, but underneath there's a version of your relationship that's richer, more playful, and more connected, and it's sitting just behind that wall of silence. Understanding this isn't about feeling sorry for him. It's about recognizing that his silence is often a sign of how much he cares, and that with the right environment, the right tone, and the right invitation, those walls can come down in ways that transform everything between you. If you've ever had the feeling that there's more your partner wants but isn't saying, you're probably right. Research consistently shows that people, and particularly men, engage in what psychologists call self-censorship in intimate contexts. They edit themselves, they soften, they swap out the thing they actually want for something more acceptable, more predictable, safer. This gap between what he imagines and what he expresses isn't a sign of dishonesty. It's a sign of how much vulnerability is required to truly let someone in. And in long-term relationships, this gap can quietly widen over time as patterns get established and neither partner pushes past the comfortable routine you've built together. But here's the exciting part. Bridging that gap doesn't require a dramatic conversation or a complete reinvention of your intimacy. Sometimes it starts with a single shift in tone, in openness, in the way you signal that you're a safe place for honesty. When he senses that you won't flinch, won't judge, and won't make him feel strange for being exactly who he is, the things he's been keeping to himself have a way of surfacing naturally. And that's where the real chemistry lives. Kink number 1, being desired aggressively. Let's start with one of the most surprising and most universally common desires men carry, the fantasy of being wanted so intensely that she loses control. Not in a passive waiting way, but actively, hungrily, urgently. Being grabbed, being pulled closer, having her hands on him before he's even had time to think, feeling like she simply cannot wait. Here's what makes this so powerful and so misunderstood. This desire has nothing to do with dominance or control dynamics in the traditional sense. It's not about power, it's about desirability. It's about the incredibly intoxicating feeling of knowing that someone wants you so much they can't hold themselves back. That feeling of being irresistible is something most men have never experienced, because in most heterosexual dynamics, the expectation is that he initiates, he pursues, he's the one doing the wanting. Flipping that script even occasionally creates something electric. It tells him something his inner world desperately needs to hear. You are attractive. You are wanted. You don't have to earn this. I just want you. That message delivered physically through her energy and her hands and her urgency hits differently than any compliment possibly could. The reason he hasn't asked for this comes down to one word: contradiction. Men are socially scripted to be the pursuer, the initiator, the one who takes charge. Admitting that he fantasizes about being chased, being grabbed, being consumed by her desire, that feels like admitting something that doesn't fit the role he's been assigned. It feels to many men almost embarrassing. There's also the fear that she'll misread it, that if he says, "I want you to come after me," like you can't help yourself, she'll wonder why he's not satisfied, or think he's critiquing how she normally shows up. The vulnerability embedded in this particular desire is profound, because at its core, it's him saying, "I need to know you really truly want me." And that kind of emotional honesty is terrifying for most men to speak aloud without the right safety in place. When you let yourself pursue him with genuine hunger, even once, even briefly, something shifts between you. He doesn't just feel physically aroused, he feels chosen, deeply, specifically, unmistakably chosen. And that emotional experience creates a bond that lingers long after the moment itself has passed. For her, there's a quiet empowerment in initiating from a place of genuine desire rather than obligation or routine. It reconnects her to her own wants. It makes intimacy feel like her space too, not just something she participates in when he initiates. That mutual sense of ownership, where both of you feel like active, hungry participants, fundamentally changes the emotional texture of your relationship. It creates a feedback loop of confidence and desire, where both partners feel seen, wanted, and thrillingly, undeniably attractive to the person who matters most. Kink number 2, praise and verbal affirmation. Here is something that might genuinely surprise you. The most powerful thing you can do for your man during intimacy may have nothing to do with what you're doing physically. It might be what you're saying, more specifically what you're saying about him, his body, his effect on you, how he makes you feel while it's happening. Men are profoundly impacted by verbal affirmation during sex, often far more than they would ever admit or even consciously recognize. Telling him what feels extraordinary, describing what you love about the way he looks, saying out loud how much he affects you. These aren't just nice things to say, they are neurologically and emotionally activating in a way that completely changes his experience of the encounter. When she speaks her pleasure aloud, not performed, not scripted, but real, it anchors him in the present moment, eliminates the anxious mental commentary that plagues most men during sex, and creates an emotional resonance that makes the entire experience feel profoundly more connected. Her voice, saying exactly what she feels, is often the most intimate thing that happens between them, and most men have never once asked for it. Men receive very few compliments in their lives, full stop, and the compliments they do receive almost never touch on their physical appearance or their performance in any intimate context. Society doesn't build frameworks for men to receive that kind of affirmation gracefully, which means most men have a deep, quiet hunger for it that they've never named, even to themselves. Asking for verbal praise feels to most men like admitting insecurity, like saying, I need you to tell me I'm doing well, I need reassurance, I'm not sure I'm enough. In a world that tells men to be confident and self-sufficient, that admission feels like weakness, so he says nothing. He performs, he shows up, he tries his best, and he waits, hoping you'll say something, knowing he'll never ask for it. The silence around this particular need is one of the loneliest spaces in many relationships. When you begin offering authentic verbal affirmation, not flattery, not performance, but genuine expression of what you actually feel, the change in him is visible almost immediately. His shoulders drop, his breathing slows. The tight, effortful quality of trying to get it right dissolves and is replaced by something much more present, much more relaxed, and infinitely more connected. Performance anxiety is one of the most common and least discussed barriers to genuine intimacy for men. It lives in the gap between what he hopes is happening and what he's afraid might be true. Your voice, saying the real thing, closes that gap entirely. It tells him, you don't have to wonder, you don't have to perform, you're here, I'm here, and this is exactly right. From that place of safety, both of you get to experience something that feels less like an act and more like a genuine meeting of two people. Kink number 3, watching her pleasure. This one surprises many women when they first hear it, and it often gets mischaracterized as something voyeuristic, something purely visual, something that centers his experience at her expense. But when you understand the actual emotional architecture of this desire, it becomes one of the most intimate things on this list. Men who fantasize about watching their partner pleasure herself are not primarily driven by visual stimulation, though that's certainly present. What drives this fantasy at its deeper level is the desire to witness her, to see her completely unguarded, to be trusted enough to be let into a moment that belongs entirely to her, that she doesn't share with anyone, that she might not even fully share with herself. There is something profoundly moving to many men about watching a woman experience pleasure on her own terms, seeing what she actually responds to, learning how her body works without the pressure of performing for an audience, witnessing the face she makes when no one is supposed to be watching. That level of authentic, unperformed vulnerability is intoxicating precisely because it's real. It's not for him, he just gets to be there, and that feels like the deepest possible trust. Here's why he'll almost certainly never ask for this directly. Asking feels, to him, like asking her to perform or expose herself in a way that serves his pleasure at her possible expense. He's aware on some level that this request could land as uncomfortable, as objectifying, or as pressure to do something that requires enormous personal vulnerability on her part. He doesn't want to be the man who puts her in that position. There's also a fear of being misread as voyeuristic or selfish, as someone who would rather watch than participate, who has somehow checked out of the intimacy they're supposed to be sharing together. None of that is what this desire is actually about, but he can't be sure she'll understand that. So he files it away, deep in the category of things that feel too risky to say, and hopes she might somehow, someday, offer it on her own. If you've ever considered exploring this with your partner, the conversation alone, the act of bringing it into the open together, creates a level of trust that most couples spend years trying to find. Because talking about it means both of you have stepped past the boundary of what's comfortable and into something genuinely honest. And if you do explore it, what happens is remarkable. She learns something deeper about her own pleasure and her comfort with being witnessed. He learns something profound about who she is when she's completely herself. And together, you've shared something that belongs only to you, a moment of such complete authenticity that it rewires how safe you both feel with each other. The aftermath of that kind of shared vulnerability isn't awkward. It's intimate in the truest sense of the word. It's the kind of closeness that quietly makes everything else between you feel safer too. Kink number 4, roleplay and fantasy scenarios. When most people hear the words roleplay, a very specific and slightly ridiculous image comes to mind: costumes, scripted lines, performances that feel more like community theater than genuine intimacy. And that image is exactly why so many couples never explore what role play actually offers, because what it actually offers has almost nothing to do with costumes. Role play at its psychological core is about permission. It's about creating a temporary frame around the intimacy that says, inside this frame, different rules apply. We can be different versions of ourselves. We can want things we don't usually let ourselves want. We can play. That psychological permission is extraordinarily powerful because most adults spend enormous amounts of energy managing how they appear to the world, to their partners, even to themselves. When you introduce an element of narrative, of fiction, of let's pretend, you're not being silly or juvenile. You're actually engaging one of the brain's most sophisticated systems, the imagination. And when imagination and desire combine in a safe, consensual space between two people who trust each other, the result isn't awkward. It's electric, it's connecting. It's one of the most effective ways to break routine that psychology has ever documented. The fear that stops him from suggesting role play is the fear of being laughed at, and not in the warm, playful way, but in the way that says that's a strange thing to want, or why isn't what we have good enough? Men who suggest fantasy scenarios risk their partner reading it as dissatisfaction with the real relationship, with her real body, with their real life together. That interpretation, even if it's completely wrong, feels devastating to risk. There's also a cultural messaging problem. Role play is often portrayed as something for the sexually adventurous, the wild, the people who need novelty because nothing else works for them anymore. Men who consider themselves normal, loving, committed partners often feel like wanting this puts them in a category they don't quite belong in. And so rather than risk that confusion, they keep the fantasy entirely to themselves and never test whether their partner might actually enjoy it. What role play actually does, in practice, for couples who try it, even tentatively, even imperfectly, is restore something that long-term relationships often quietly lose: lightness, playfulness, the sense that intimacy can be fun, not just meaningful or mechanical or routine. When you step into a fantasy together, even briefly, you both shed the weight of being exactly who you always are. The responsibilities, the familiarity, the slightly too comfortable patterns you've settled into. You get to rediscover each other with fresh eyes inside a fictional frame. And almost always, it leads to laughter, which leads to closeness, which leads to the kind of intimacy that reminds both of you why you chose each other in the first place. The couples who play together, who allow themselves to be ridiculous, imaginative, and adventurous in their private world, tend to have something deeply resilient at the center of their relationship. Kink number 5, gentle dominance from her. Let's be very clear about what this means and, more importantly, what it doesn't mean. Because dominance is a word that carries a lot of baggage and often conjures images that have nothing to do with what we're actually talking about here. Gentle dominance from her is not about harshness. It's not about cruelty, control, or any kind of power dynamic that makes either person feel diminished. What it actually looks like is this: she knows what she wants, and she's not afraid to say so. She guides, she directs, she puts her hand where she wants it, and moves him where she'd like him to be. She tells him what to do, not with commands, but with confident, clear, wanting energy that says, I know what I want right now, and it's you doing this. That quality, confident, directive, self-knowing desire, is something a remarkable number of men fantasize about deeply, because most men move through their intimate lives making constant decisions: what to do next, how to read her signals, whether this is working, what she wants. Gentle dominance from her removes all of that guesswork instantly. It replaces it with something far more satisfying: being chosen, being directed, being wanted with complete clarity. What most women underestimate is the sheer weight of the expectation that men will always lead, always initiate, always know what to do, always perform confidently regardless of how they're actually feeling. That pressure, invisible, unspoken, but absolutely present, is exhausting in ways he probably hasn't fully articulated even to himself. When she takes the lead, something releases in him that rarely gets to relax. He doesn't have to figure it out. He doesn't have to guess. He doesn't have to manage her experience while simultaneously managing his own. He can simply be there, fully present, fully responsive, fully relieved of the performance that intimacy so often requires of him. That experience of genuine rest within desire is something many men have never felt before, and when they do, it doesn't make them feel diminished. It makes them feel profoundly cared for, seen in a way they didn't know they needed. The most alive, most resilient, most genuinely satisfying long-term relationships share one quality: flexibility. The ability of both partners to lead and follow, to be strong and soft, to initiate and receive. When one person always plays the same role, something slowly calcifies: a subtle resentment, a quiet boredom, a growing sense that the dynamic has stopped evolving. When she steps into gentle dominance, even occasionally, even tentatively, it immediately disrupts that calcification in the most productive way possible. He discovers a side of her he didn't fully know. She discovers a capacity in herself she might have been sitting on. The relationship gains a dimension it didn't have before, and that new dimension doesn't replace what was there, it adds to it. Both partners leading, both partners following, both partners willing to occupy the full spectrum of what intimacy can be. That's the foundation of a dynamic that stays genuinely, lastingly exciting. Look back at everything we've explored today: being desired aggressively, verbal affirmation, witnessing her pleasure, fantasy and role play, gentle dominance, and you'll find the same thread woven through every single one. None of these desires are extreme. None of them are signs of dysfunction or dissatisfaction. Every single one of them is at its root a desire for deeper connection. They're all asking the same fundamental questions in different ways. Do you see me? Do you want me? Am I safe to be fully myself with you? Can we go somewhere together that we haven't gone before? The vulnerability, the trust, the willingness to break from routine, the hunger for emotional honesty, these are the actual building blocks beneath every kink, every fantasy, every desire that lives unspoken in an intimate relationship. When you strip away the surface layer of any of these 5 desires, what you find isn't something shocking or complicated. What you find is a person, your person, quietly hoping that you'll love all of him, including the parts he hasn't shown you yet. That is what all of this has been pointing toward. That's the real secret. So what do you actually do with everything you've learned today? You don't need to walk into your next intimate moment with a checklist. You don't need to have a formal conversation with a notepad and an agenda. What you need is far simpler than that and far more powerful. Start by creating safety. Signal through your tone, your curiosity, your openness that you are a person he can be honest with, that you won't flinch, that you won't judge, that you're genuinely interested in knowing him more completely, not just the comfortable edited version of him that fits neatly into the life you've built together. Then listen, ask open questions without pressure, share something of your own, let the conversation be imperfect and meandering and real, because the goal isn't to immediately execute on a fantasy list. The goal is to build the kind of trust where neither of you needs to hide anymore. And that kind of trust doesn't just improve your intimate life, it improves everything. It changes how you fight, how you forgive, how you show up for each other on ordinary Tuesday evenings when nothing is particularly romantic at all. You now know something most women don't. Use it with love.